The committee made recommendations in 5 key areas. It's important to increase awareness and understanding. This is absolutely essential, and I'll say more about it in a minute. Strengthen the law's response, to strengthen research on prevention and intervention, to support collaboration, and to support information sharing. All of these priorities are equally important, but I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about the supporting awareness. Our overall conclusions are that efforts to, oh wait, I did the wrong thing, never mind. So in terms of increasing awareness and understanding, there are 3 important levels here. One of the most important is to increase public awareness. This is a problem in the United States. It occurs in cities, towns, rural areas across our country to a variety of children, some of whom have the risk factors that we've identified, some of whom live in homes with their families, some of whom know about this exploitation, some of whom don't. We need to raise awareness of the public. The second thing we need to do is to raise awareness of the adults who actually interact with these young people. Teachers, healthcare providers, social workers, the justice system, both juvenile justice, the criminal justice system, the police, so that they are aware that this is happening, so that they have the tools to identify these young people, preferably to prevent these kinds of harms from happening, but in any event to identify them early, to get them into intervention early. This is absolutely critical. A third group who needs to be reached out to are young people themselves. Many of these young people who get involved with commercial sexual exploitation and sex trafficking don't even know that they're victims. And so they need to be educated early on, before they get trapped in this system, to realize that this is a problem and that this is a bad thing, to immunize them. How about that for a pediatric word? Immunize them against this problem. All of these educational efforts are absolutely critical and need to be going on at a variety of levels. Strengthening the law's response. This actually takes 2 parts. The first are develop laws and policies that redirect the victims and survivors of sexual exploitation away from the criminal justice system and into the kind of services that are needed to help them recover and go on and lead healthy adult lives. This is a critical area. There are some noteworthy practices that are going on. Some states are beginning to adopt safe harbor laws, which basically hold that young people who are involved in commercial sexual exploitation as victims cannot be prosecuted as prostitutes or as criminals, but rather have to be identified as victims. These are children who are prostituted. These are children who are harmed. These are not criminals. And that these laws should apply to all children under the age of 18. The other thing that needs to happen in the area of strengthening the law's response is that we need to hold those who promote sex trafficking, exploiters, perpetrators, purchasers. You'll notice I'm not using words like pimps or johns, which are something that we want to avoid. We want to call these acts what they are. They are criminal acts of exploitation, perpetration, purchasing that need to be called what they are, and these individuals need to be held accountable. One of the things that we found in this area is that a number of states are passing laws that actually enact penalties for these kinds of acts. But one of the challenges that prosecutors are running into, as is often true with brand new laws, is that they are uncertain how to prosecute these cases. The judges may not know how to respond to these cases. And so one of the things that we call out for very clearly is to give these prosecutors the tools to develop to use the laws they have to identify these criminals and to hold them accountable. We need to strengthen research on prevention and intervention. You've already heard Richard say that almost no effort has been paid on prevention, and yet this is absolutely critical. the ultimate goal here is that no child should be the victim of sexual exploitation or sex trafficking. This means addressing demand. This means identifying children at risk and developing effective interventions that give them the tools to avoid this kind of involvement. So we need to spend a lot more effort on prevention. And then we also need to spend more time on intervention. And this is going to go into one of my next points. This problem is so complicated, as you've seen from the diagram that Richard showed just a few minutes ago, that there is no way that any single sector can possibly address this problem on its own. And that some of the things that we saw in some of our site visits were programs where people working across disciplinary backgrounds, where teachers were working with social workers, we're working with adolescent health, we're working with juvenile justice, we're working with the police to come up, and non-governmental organizations, to come up with efforts to try to identify and develop multidisciplinary, multi-sector strategies to address these young people's needs, to help them overcome the effects of the severe trauma that they have undergone. And then we need to evaluate the effectiveness of these programs. I'm happy to say that federal law recently required the evaluation of programs funded under federal law, but we need to do more evaluation. This should not slow us up in terms of implementation, but we need to act now. But we need to examine what we're doing now so that we can hone our programs and hone our interventions so that we can develop interventions that actually work. It's not enough to do something. It has to do something that works. In terms of supporting collaboration, we call on the Coordinating Council on Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention to take a leadership role in this. This is a council in the executive branch that has secretaries of numerous agencies working together, chaired by the Attorney General, to develop collaborative strategies for dealing with some of these issues. And we really ask them to take a leadership role in coordinating the kind of research and service delivery that we need going forward. Information sharing. We've talked about this a little bit already, but I'll say just a little bit more. There are some crying needs in this area, and also some hopeful paths forward. We need to share information about who these perpetrators are, who these criminals are, so that prosecutors can find them and prosecute them more effectively. We heard testimony from LexisNexis that working with local law enforcement is developing databases that can actually allow identification of perpetrators across jurisdictional lines to facilitate prosecution. We need to develop systems that allow sharing of information about young people so that we can identify young people at risk. This presents some real challenges, but these young people interact with a lot of systems. A lot of them go to school. A lot of them interact with the healthcare system. A lot of them interact with social services. A lot of them are in foster care. And if these entities are able more effectively to collaborate together to share information, it may be possible to identify these young victims earlier so that we can help them more effectively. Finally, and this is something that we call for very strongly, it's really hard when you identify a problem or some person who's in trouble and you don't know how to help them and you don't know how to figure out how to help them. And so one of the things that we call for is for the development of a federally based database that actually allows the teacher, the healthcare provider, the social worker who identifies one of these children immediately, or even the kids themselves, to identify effective interventions that are available right away to help these young children. When I practice medicine, I have a computer at my side. I have Hippocrates in my pocket so that I can find out what drugs I ought to be using, et cetera, et cetera. Those same types of tools ought to be available for every person who's working who has the opportunity to identify these young children and to figure out how to help them effectively. Finally, in the last 2 pages of the main part of the report, we have a whole bunch of to-do lists for a whole bunch of people, including Congress, the executive branch, state legislatures, federal agencies, bar associations, academic and research institutions, foundations and NGOs, and not the least of which is the commercial sector. You know, what's interesting is that everybody who interacts with young kids, if they don't identify, they're facilitating. If they do identify, and if they do take responsibility, then they have an opportunity to intervene to make this stop. And it's clear that this is true for every sector, including the commercial sector. So we call on, and we heard some really noteworthy examples from them, so we call on them very clearly to do this. The next thing we want to do, Patty in particular, has developed a video that we want to share with you that is now live on YouTube, which you can share with everybody you want. Send it to everybody. Okay, thank you. So just in closing, I actually shouldn't even do this because that's so powerful. Final thoughts. This is going to require collaboration in a whole lot of sectors. but the time is now. We must act. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll turn it over to Jennifer.